はい、こんばんは。
Imagine someone you love died, and in your grief, the Millennium Earl comes and offers to bring them back. Once you agree, they do so, but he controls them to kill you and take away your body, to live in suffering under his control. But fear not, for the Black Order sends out exorcists wielding weapons of innocence to defeat this evil. Hey YouTube! Today I'm bringing you a Halloween video, customizing Alan Walker from the anime D.Gray-Man. I'm using a Pika Nemo as a base doll, and since I couldn't decide which version of Alan I wanted to make, I'm starting with the first uniform, and I hope to do the others with the same doll and just different outfits. One reason I'm starting with this version is that I really wanted to try and make the huge arm that is Alan's innocence. So, I'm starting off with my first ever head shrinking attempt. Since I got the pre-rooted head, I'm going with the slow shrink method of 10% water and 90% acetone. I did cut a piece of the hair prior to test it if it melts in the acetone. It doesn't, thankfully. And I remember to make sure that the acetone is completely inside the head, since it's a bit difficult to know with these tiny heads with the small nickels. It was also interesting to see when the head had expanded, the rooting holes showed through the lightly colored hair. I did switch to a larger bottle during the shrinking because originally nothing was happening, and I thought the acetone might be evaporating due to the construction of the bottle's lid. Anyway, after soaking for 2 days, I carefully remove the head and shake out the acetone and leave it to dry. After shrinking, the head was rock hard, so I switched out the type of neck peg I was going to be using. The size difference between before and after shrinking is quite big, and somehow the nose seems a bit more defined than it was. Anyway, the closest hair color option was silver, which matches Alan quite well, as he's often described as having grey, silver or white hair. But the hair is a bit too dark for my liking, so I used a mixture of warm water and white acrylic paint to dye the hair a shade lighter. I do this by applying the mixture on the hair, and after it dried, I rinsed it out with warm water while combing the hair out. I was experimenting and not expecting it to work, so I didn't record. Though I wouldn't recommend this for long hair or hair that gets played with often, because it really affects the texture. The color difference isn't big, but it's there, and I quite like the more matte look. During the head shrinking process, I started with his innocence. I wanted to keep it posable, so I used an extra large bendy store that his arm could fit into as base. I temporarily painted it silver to see if the paint will stick or peel. I cut the store to length, and then I add my epoxy putty to the top and bottom of the store, forming the shoulder and the palm. It's mostly the first pair's rough shapes, which I sand into the correct shape off screen. I drilled a hole into the side of the palm and molded the thumb onto a wire that fits in the hole. Then I marked where I use my Dremel to make grooves in the palm for where the other fingers will go, since I'm planning on making the fingers posable. I once again drill a hole through the palm in the front where the other finger joints will go, and also drill holes into coffee stirring sticks, which will be the fingers. Then I thread a wire through the hand and fingers and glue it in place. It was a bit tedious process to get everything lined up, but I succeeded. After cutting the sticks to size, I start fleshing out the shapes of the fingers with my epoxy putty, making sure I keep most of the movement of the fingers. I do this over several passes, and I don't work on all the fingers at the same time to prevent me from accidentally smooshing something. I do have a scaled reference to help me get the right size and proportions of the fingers. And while I had the epoxy out, I also sculpted this cursed eye monocle, which I'll later cast in resin. It was quite difficult to try and sculpt in this size, since it's a gear and a lot of details and all. And it still ended up a bit bigger than I'd like. Oh well. After lots and lots of carving and sanding off screen, I draw up the segmentation with a pencil, trying to blend it into the store. And then I use a nail art bit in my Dremel to carve out the details, including the cross on the hand. In the background you can also see a partially sculpted Tim Campy, which is part of the footage I lost. I have a wire for Tim's tail and 2 armature wires for the wings, and I loop the wires to help the epoxy stick. Mostly simple shapes. Next I started the clothes, and started with the pants. Simple 4 panels sewn together at the crotch, then side seams, then hemming the waistband and cuffs, partially sewing up the back, and then the inner leg seams and adding velcro. Simple enough. Unfortunately, I lost a lot of footage due to a bit stressful day in real life, which led me not thinking right and not saving my film or footage rather. Which was some sculpting like Tim and the buttons, as well as sewing the coat and shoes. The coat is a bit complicated, so I won't try to explain it without the visual medium. And the shoes are simple enough to figure out. Sorry about that. So, short face-up process this time. I sealed with MSC and started sketching with watercolor pencils. About the face style I chose, it's from later in the manga, specifically some illustrations, where for some reason I just find the art really aesthetically pleasing, and since I'm planning to make him clothes for his later iterations, I went with this even though it's not outfit accurate, and that includes the red cursed eye, which in earlier in the series was grey like his other eye. So sketching out the eyes with light brown pencil, and then going over that with black, blocking in some colors for the eyes, the mouth, the eyelids, etc. Nothing complicated, just a lot of concentration and very sharp pencils. after I'm happy, I seal again and continue with paint. Fins down properly and hopefully mixed the right colors. And honestly, it's just going over with the colors the same as the watercolor pencils, just adding a bit more detail here and there, like catch lights and shadows in the eyes, in the eye whites. I can't talk. But anyway, sorry for being off screen a lot of the time for this part. I had some trouble holding my hand steady at the time and didn't want to constantly have to erase and redo on screen. And after I was happy with that, I sealed again, and that's the face. I was definitely going for a simpler, more graphic style with the face, rather than with a lot of blushing, which seems to be my go-to for face-ups. So I need to get more blushing practice. Maybe next time. So, after shrinking the head, the neck appeared too long, so I cut it shorter, sanded the bevel for the ball of the joint to sit in, and drilled further into the neck for the neck peg to go in. Just be careful, it's still vinyl and can warp with extreme heat generated from drilling and sanding. Mine did, and I had to sand the neck down to fix it because it made a big lump at the back of the neck. Next, one of the things I suck at, hair. And that's why I chose a pre-rooted head, so I don't have to worry about the itty bitty wig. And I started by lopping off many chunks of hair. Then I slowly trimmed down the hair to the desired length. Don't ask me how, it just worked out nicely, somehow, I don't know. I don't have this hair thing down. And then I temporarily placed masking tape over his bangs to keep it in place while I cut it. Mainly because after the face up the hair didn't want to go lay down again, and I was iffy about using boiling water on the face. I don't have that much MSC, so I don't really want to have to redo the face. And once again, I'm styling the hair according to the illustration I used as reference for the face. And as usual, for me, I use water glue. And with the help of a hairdryer, I force the hair into place. I didn't think it worked out perfectly, but it looks good and I think it matches the style. Next, I painted the gloves white, and I mixed up a maroonish red color to paint his arm when he's inactive. I specifically once again went with the design later in the series rather than at the beginning of the series, mainly because it's just paint and not sculpting, but also it's the original arm is just applicable to the first uniform he's wearing now and not to literally all of his later iterations. Unfortunately, although I painted the joints, it literally peeled off seconds after I painted it, so when I eventually get the right color dye, I will be dyeing the joints. Tim Campy was easy to paint. I just used my Tamiya gold enamel paint, and I'm using a clothesline pin to hold him up on his tail, since I used the gold wire and it's already gold, so I don't have to paint it. So off screen I made a mold of his cursed eye monocle, and now I'm mixing some pink glow-in-the-dark powder into my UV resin, putting it in the mold and curing it while I have a piece of wire sticking out, which I can use to pin it to the hair. I did later try to paint the monocle the black and red eye, but it didn't look good and the glow-in-the-dark effect was impossible to see with it, so I removed it again. So I got this lovely chrome silver marker, and all the buttons, the monocle and his innocence were painted with it. Unfortunately, if you handle it afterwards, the silver becomes tarnished, so I had to seal it with a high gloss water-based varnish, even though that unfortunately took away a bit of the chrome effect. But it still looks quite chrome and silver, and I guess technically a bit better since it's not a real and more anime character. Also, I don't know if it's the marker or the sealant, but the posability of the arm was affected, so it can bend, but it can no longer keep the pose, which sucks. The fingers are still fine though. For the Exorcist cast on his chest, I used a mix of paper and cardboard, gluing it together, and that's that. It's so small that I couldn't really get any detail in it. By the way, I'm using the original anime version instead of the rose cast from the manga and the Hello anime, for personal reasons, and it'll be way more difficult to get that tiny detail on. Now I used some glow-in-the-dark paint for the cast on his hand, and for the last piece, the glowing green flame on his shoulder from when his innocence is activated. I started with some clear plastic, cut into the shape that I want with a hole so that the arm can go through, and I cut an extra piece of the clear plastic to help get the 3D effect. So I mixed some UV resin with green glow-in-the-dark pigment and a tiny bit of white and cure it layer by layer onto the plastic sheet until I'm happy. And all that's left is to dress him up and take pics. So this was a fun project. I wish I had 2 more days of time to work on it. As you can see, I'm already a bit late for Halloween. But I think he turned out pretty cute. And I'd like to make all the characters, or all the main cast eventually. Although there are some things that I'm unhappy with, like the hood. You have to take off the whole jacket to put it on his head. So I'll probably make that part. And I'm a bit unhappy at my After all that work with the stole, my innocence arm is no longer posable, although it can bend. But I really like how Alan turned out, and I hope you enjoyed me watching me make him and think he looks cute as well. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.